Comcast is delivering extraordinary experiences in live sports through the incredible broadcast and storytelling from NBC, innovative and personalized viewing features on Xfinity and Peacock, and the country's most reliable Wi-Fi. Viewers can enjoy every game-changing play faster and more seamlessly than ever, all on a network built to deliver unforgettable moments as close to live as possible. The ultimate experience for the American sports fan. Learn more at ComcastCorporation.com/sports.
Listen, all you New Yorkers. Excuse me. Taxi.
Okay, man, we're looking around.
This is the 77 WABC minicast.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
You know, Reverend, when Congressman Peter King left Congress, it all fell apart, right? When he was there, he kind of held it together, and he's America's congressman. But I was talking with him the other day, and this was after the return of the astronauts, Artemis II. I said to him, you know, one of the astronauts years ago said, when they asked him, so what were you thinking when you went up into space? What was your first thought? He said, my first thought? I looked at the control panel, and I thought to myself, the guy who submitted the lowest bid got this job. Anyway. All right, so I know you're trying to make peace between the Pope and the President. Explain this to us. Why get into not just a disagreement, but why get into this kind of disagreement? How do you explain this? You know, there are unnecessary battles in life.
And look, first, let's line it up, because there's so many things that the president did and said within a 10-day span. Specifically, this was about his offense concerning Pope Leo, and you posted something, and you were very clear in expressing yourself. Talk about that post, please.
Yeah, it really raised several issues. One is that there was no excuse whatsoever for the style the president used, the rant against the Pope, saying that apparently the Pope doesn't care about crime, the Pope doesn't care if Iran has nuclear weapons. And that, to me, was totally missing the mark. So first of all, the Pope is entitled to respect, and I would say that about any religious leader. The Pope has made statements. Now, I happen to disagree. I think that within modern circumstances, what's happening in Iran can be called and should be called a just war. But that you can have an honest debate on that. Because going back in Catholic tradition to the days of St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine, that you can engage in war for the purpose of defending yourself. But in today's day and age, you shouldn't have to wait until the rockets are on their way. If a country says that they're going to destroy you and they want to be putting together nuclear weapons, you have the right to preempt them. That's my view. That's subject to an honest discussion. And what President Trump should have said, and would have actually served a real purpose. I have the greatest respect for what Pope Leo has said. I believe we have an honest disagreement there. And then he could have gotten somebody on his staff who understands Catholic teaching or Christian teaching to put something together why he thought that in the long run and the short run, this was the best thing to do, because it would save lives. It would also weaken a tyrannical regime, and that every step would be taken to avoid civilian casualties and deaths. But he understood the intensity of feeling on all sides, and be sure that the United States is doing all it can to bring this to a peaceful end. That would have at least had an intelligent basis to it, and it would have, I think, also given the president the opportunity to make his case, because people would have looked at it more seriously, because he would be going back and forth with the Pope on a very intelligent basis. And also, there's 1.4 billion Catholics around the world, many of them in European countries, where the president is very unpopular. They would have seen this, and at least it could have calmed down some of the intensity, the intense anti-Trump, anti-American feeling that's out there. But there's no excuse at all. But again, attacking the Pope the way he did, it was just, and I would say the same thing. It was any religious leader at all, anyone in a position of respect, a person who obviously feels deeply and sincerely. I mean, the Pope he's not coming here to campaign against Trump. This is not a political campaign. He was expressing his views, and that is certainly a set of views within the Catholic Church. He's not speaking infallibly. There's no moral obligation to support him, but there is a moral obligation, I think, among Catholics to consider what he said, and that to me is our obligation. The president treated it as if you're just talking about some politician in Queens or Brooklyn or the Bronx, and he was going to attack him, which is really below him. It's certainly below the office of the president.
And that's important because in your statement, you said it trivialized the presidency and as well as misreading the historical significance of the papacy. And that's the problem that I have. Yeah. The president of the most powerful country in the world, there should be a certain dignity. There should be a certain level of respect, a standard of conduct that we should expect from that particular office. And that's a problem.
What bothered me was, given the ugliness of rhetoric today, and all you have to do is look at social media, it was missing a major moment to show how we could have civility in spite of, disagreement. What an example that would have been. But it was lost here, and it became ugly, and there's no reason for it. And as you say, we can take different sides. Look, I fully agree with, this removal of evil, and I can quote Jewish tradition. Someone comes to kill you, you make sure that you remove that person first. We can quote a host of sources. There have been battles, throughout religious history. People all say, well, all war is evil. We don't think so. Just think back to World War II. The fact that we went to war was unfortunate, but it wasn't evil because we removed evil. So
sometimes not removing evil can be a sin in itself.
That's evil.
Allowing evil to continue.
Non-removal of evil is evil.
Yeah.
It put you in an awkward place, didn't it, Congressman? Here you are, you're a proud Catholic, disagreeing with the Pope. I mean, it may make you available for conversion to Judaism. I don't know what the punishment is for disagreeing with a Pope as a Catholic, but it's going to make you.
I heard there's a Christian minister who has a very, very large congregation, and maybe I could, sort of an application there.
I'll give me Joel Osteen. I'll get you I have his number.
I know where this is going. Hey, look, I spoke up. I posted that the disrespect of the Pope. Of Pope Leo by the president, and look, depicting himself as Jesus. Let's talk about that image that he put together there. What are your thoughts, Congressman?
That was just totally. First of all, it's wrong. If you start with that, it's wrong. And also, it shows a misreading on his part about what Christianity is about or what religion is about. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is there's certain. There's all different levels of argument and debate. And when it comes to religion, I mean, to me, it's beyond me how he could have even considered using that. And it's just, again, the whole idea of blasphemy. Also, if I can go back to something else you said, Reverend, about him not realizing, the historical significance of the
papacy.
And also of institutions generally. And not to bring back an old issue, but I think that was the case on January 6th. I mean, I'm saying this now as an American, if I had seen anybody in my name attacking the Capitol, I would have gone crazy. I mean, I would have on the phone immediately, get back here, stop it. I mean, that to me was if there's such a thing as a sacrilege in a civilian situation, that was it. That was the Capitol is the symbol of democracy in this country. The papacy is the symbol of Catholicism, which is the oldest Christian religion. And we can say the same thing about so many different religious centers around the world, whether it's the Holocaust Museum. I mean, there's so many things. There's so many things, and yet so few things that really stand out as something that should not be touched or brought into political debate, and he's violated a lot of them.
Yeah, and even if you disagree with the papacy, because there is a segment of Christian evangelicalism, Christian Protestantism, that has a serious problem with the papacy, and they have certain religious beliefs around that, especially, dispensationalists who tend to be quite apocalyptic in their thinking. The world's going to end, and the Pope is looked upon as a nefarious being. But even if you feel that way, even if you have that,
Antichrist.
I mean, you know what I'm talking about. Exactly. Yeah. But even if you feel that way, there is still a certain level of respect that you should have and conduct yourself.
So let me expand that a little bit. I understand the respect, papacy, all good. But there needs to be respect many times, or there should be respect, at all times, for the presidency. And I find when people equate the president with Hitler, and they say he's Hitler, when you have someone in Congress who speaks of, the Jews and the Benjamins, and nothing is said to condemn it, it's everybody's looking at what was said here about the Pope. But let's expand the lens and look the other way, where ugly things are said about the president. Criticism is warranted, but the ugliness of the criticism is not.
Well, even today, the way the term pedophile is thrown around casually almost. I mean, that's one of the, if there's, degrees of severity with sin, certainly pedophilia has to be among the worst of them. And yet that's thrown around casually. Now, if you disagree with somebody, they call them a pedophile. That's like the latest example, I think. And you're right, though. Or saying that the president is a Russian agent, or again, attacking Democrats saying they're communists. I mean, there should be certain levels of debate that are just outside debate.
And we understand that. We're going to be taking a break, but when we come back, because we have that here in New York City, where things became personal between politicians and radio political pundits. And, Rabbi stepped in so beautifully in that particular situation. We'll talk a little bit more about it when we come back.
It's all about boundaries.
Yeah, and there has to be boundaries.
Stresses boundaries.
And I'm going to give Sid Rosenberg a shout out, okay? When we come back, more of the Reverend, the Rabbi, right here on Red Apple Radio Networks.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard. So, it got personal between Mayor Mamdani and the talk show host. And the talk show host said some things that were, personal. And yeah, it can get emotional and personal. But one thing I'm going to give Sid Rosenberg a shout out for, and that is that he was willing to apologize. Rabbi reached out to him, others talked to him and said, look, you know what? I crossed the line. And we have to have lines. We have to have boundaries. Without boundaries of respect and honor, we will lose our human dignity and really degrade ourselves.
Look, I've said this, it's not just Sid. I've said this to the mayor. I've said this to other people. You're an exemplar of what decency should be. You're elected to an office. You're on the air. People look to you for, some model behavior. And when that's not present, we can't blame kids for the way they talk if we talk the same way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We can't blame kids for crudeness and coarseness if we're crude and coarse.
Yeah, but Rabbi, it goes both ways.
Right.
It's not just
absolutely.
what the people are saying about someone in an esteemed political office, but also what the person in political office is saying about people.
Exactly.
So it goes both ways.
You want to teach honesty to your kids, you got to be honest. You want to teach humility, you got to be humble.
Yeah.
You want to teach decency, you got to be decent.
You got to model it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Congressman?
Yeah, I fully agree with that. Listen, New York is a tough place for politics. There's a lot back and forth, and that's been our tradition over the years. But it's only recently that these other lines are being crossed. It was always as tough as it got. As much as you'd have Al D'Amato yelling at somebody, or Ed Cosby fighting with somebody, or Mario Cuomo, and they could get tough. But it stopped at a certain line.
Yeah.
And now that we're going over that line, and that to me is really dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to talk to you about something. There was a bill that was passed, Defense for Israel, this past week. And I saw 40 Democrats were against it. Now, historically, there's always been this bipartisan support for Israel. And here you have 40 Democrats. That's a very high number who voted against it. And, of course, it was led by Bernie Sanders, who, for us is a reprehensible individual. What do you say about
What was the bill about for you? Got to.
It was about providing aid to Israel. Also,
and it was mainly defensive weaponry.
Yeah.
I mean, that was basically a defensive weaponry. And unfortunately, aid to Israel has become a metaphor for somehow it's almost like a cover of anti-Semitism in some cases. And Israelis, when I was in Congress, people would say, oh, you're doing a good job defending Israel, which I was proud to do. But it wasn't that hard to do. There was very little opposition in Congress for aid to Israel or standing with Israel for being our major ally in the Middle East. And now, listen, I support what Israel is doing. You can always refine this way or that way. But the fact is, you could make honest disagreements with Israeli policy. It's gone way beyond that. Certainly with the demonstrations we've seen here in New York, and that's had an impact on people in public life. And you have, to me, there was no excuse at all for voting the way they did to cut off that aid or to not have it go forward. That's essential. Israel will not survive without defense systems. They live in the most dangerous neighborhood in the world. And whatever disagreements we have with Israel, we should do it one-on-one, but not by cutting the military aid that they need to survive. And to me, that was a real strong statement, indicating more than just a military or political disagreement, but really the anti-Jewish feeling that's been spreading throughout New York and throughout the country, and which I really, I did not see it. I can say the whole time I was in Congress, except for a few remarks, like, about the Benjamins by some people. But I would say 99% of Congress, there was not even a hint of anti-Semitism. Now, some people may have felt differently as far as what was said or what was acceptable. Not there at all. It was always, again.
Is this the sentiment of those in Congress or their constituents that they're trying to represent?
I think it's
pressured to represent, yeah. Yeah,
pressure is really, and to me, there comes a time where you can't say, well, I'm doing it for my constituents. I mean, if that was the case, no one in many, many states or locales ever would have voted for civil rights legislation because people were against it. And that was, like they talk about the civil rights bill, when you had these southern senators, and they say, well, that's what my constituents want. Well, the fact is that that's no excuse. I mean, if it's wrong, you can have honest disagreements, but on something that involves immorality, or something that involves injustice, it's no excuse to say you're doing what civilians want. Otherwise, you're just giving into a lynch mob.
Yeah, that's good.
It's interesting. When you ran for office, as I recall, you got a significant Democratic vote.
I had to. In fact, the last, I guess I'm trying to keep track of the years now. The last 8 years I was in Congress, I was in a district that was only 35% Republican. And by then I had established some, at least halfway decent reputation. But I mean, so I was able to maybe make some tough votes. But to me, if it's something involving a tax issue or a public works project, okay, then you're voting for your constituents. But if you're talking about life or death, if you're talking about war or peace, you vote what you believe is best for the country, and you have to overcome the pressure to give into something. On, for instance, I give Mario Cuomo credit when certainly the overwhelming majority of New Yorkers supported capital punishment. He came out against it, and to me, that takes courage to do that. So I give people credit who are willing to take the unpopular position.
So let's talk about NATO, where we are. The United States. It's been tense back and forth. What are your thoughts on where we are in relationship to NATO now?
Well, I've had a lot of frustration and disagreements with European leaders over the years. Having said that, NATO is essential to European defense, and that's essential to our defense. NATO has been a reason there has not been a war in Europe, except for right after the collapse of the Soviet Empire, when you had fighting in the Balkans, when it was contained to the Balkans. But as far as countries invading one another, as far as France and Germany and England, there's been none of that. We have maintained peace in Europe, and by maintaining peace in Europe, that keeps peace for the United States. And to me, it's served a very solid defense purpose. And when the president says that they've done nothing, well, after 9/11. NATO responded immediately, and countries like Denmark and Britain and Poland did exceptionally well. In Afghanistan, they had actually higher, in some ways, almost as high casualty rates as the United States. So NATO's been there. And I mean, my frustration with European leaders is they're always forming a committee to form another committee.
I know houses of worship that operate that way too in all denominations. Yeah.
I mean, I use the example of Bosnia. This goes back to 1995. There was a terrible war going on in Bosnia, and actually it was Muslims who were being persecuted, and and Europeans would say, if we get involved in that, it's going to go on for decades. It'll never end. There'll be no stopping it. We can't. And we need more diplomacy. Finally, Bill Clinton, I think it was in September of 1995, he attacked. He actually used air power, and the war was over within a week. I mean, it was over. It was over, and you had people like Dick Holbrook and Bill Clinton give him credit. Bob Dole, he crossed party lines there. That was John McCain. And it was always so. Europe doesn't always measure up, but again, they have been there. So I think the president would be making a mistake. If we pull out of NATO, that would be the best gift that Vladimir Putin ever got. They've been, if communists can pray, he's been praying for the end of NATO.
That's
Let me ask you, we're going to wrap this up shortly. Remember Father Robert Dryden from Massachusetts?
Yes, I do, yeah.
And I remember there were people who felt he should step aside because he's a devout Catholic and that might conflict with the political agenda. Do you ever have that in your life?
Oh, some people would say that. I mean, I take a pro-life position on abortion, but I at least to convince myself I wasn't doing it because I was a Catholic. I mean, Catholic teaching may have informed me, but then you have a Jewish atheist, Nat Hentoff, was also totally pro-life. And so, I mean, yeah, people would say that, but to me, you have to, again, when you're in office a while, you have a chance to prove yourself, whether or not you're doing it based on what you think is right and on the merits, or rather than just doing it on the basis of your religion or your ethnic background. So,
and that's a real tension that the elected officials live in, especially if you have a conscience. If there is a moral compass that you live by, you will live in a tension. That's a reality.
I think Peter King proved better to be principled than simply be popular.
Yeah.
And you were able to do both. Do you miss it at all?
And stay in office.
Yeah. Do you miss being there, not being there?
I miss it when something dramatic is happening, when there's a real tension. I miss being there. But when I wake up on a Monday morning and realize I can go back to sleep and not have to take the shuttle down to Washington, I don't miss that now.
Yeah, the pragmatic comes into play.
Also, I'll be honest with you. Not that they were the days of calm and peace. We all loved each other. But again, there were certain lines that weren't crossed, and there were always like a few crazy people who sit in the back, and you let them talk. And but when it came down to it, we were able to get the job done.
Peter King, it's always a blessing having you on the program. We've come to the end of the segment, in fact, the end of the show.
And we'll give you refuge, in our synagogue, and you'll do it at the church.
Of course, absolutely.
I know.
I might be knocking on A.R. Bernard's door. I don't know.
He's got a pass. He's got a free pass.
There's no capital campaign you have to do.
Really.
And in our faith, that's how you get to heaven. It's who you know, not what you know.
All right. Thank you.
We are done. Another incredible episode of The Rev and the Rabbi right here on Red Apple Radio Network. Till next time, God bless.